Throughout all of human history, we as a species have lived through some horrific events that have seen many wiped out by diseases, viruses, and other forms of natural anomalies. Despite all that has hit us, we have overcome them and adapted our lives and evolved our immunities to fight back against these invisible things. But the memory of these events have certainly lived forever in the history books, as we learn from each of them. For one village out within Eastern Europe, however, they would not only have to suffer one of the most deadly viruses circulating in the early 20th century, but also a new phenomenon that many had not seen before that would find itself in the form of a mold. This mold would see the village shape into something horrifying, with unnatural beasts roaming the land, humans turning into terrifying monstrosities with growths forming all over them, as well as new mutated body parts to help them do things humans could only dream of, like flying, increased restoration, and swimming for long periods of time. At the center of this, a new cult was formed to worship this discovery, as well as this new age for the village. This cult had one person at the center of it all. That leader was known as Mother Miranda, who was responsible for not only finding this mold, but using it to transform all of those with power and influence on the land in the hope to further her ultimate goals. But who is Mother Miranda? How did she find this mold, and why does she use it on the people of the village? What were her ultimate goals, and what happened to her in the end? Well, in today's video, we will be looking at the history of the village and their cult leader known as Mother Miranda. This is the story of Mother Miranda from Resident Evil Village. Miranda was born around the latter half of the 19th century in a farming-focused mountain village in Eastern Europe. Going into her adulthood, Miranda would become a mother in the year of 1909, as she gave birth to her very first and only child she would name Eva. All things were going well for the first 10 years of Eva's upbringing, and Miranda was cherishing the lifestyle of being a mother. However, that was all to quickly change in the year of 1919, as the whole of Europe was hit with a new virus that would be originally named the Spanish flu. As the flu reached Miranda's small remote village, it would devastate the population, wiping out so many that the cemetery became too full up and overcrowded with the dead. This forced many of the villagers to bury their loved ones in new locations, with most of them taken to burying them outside of the village within places like Potter's Field. Sadly for Miranda, one of the names on the list of the dead was to be her own daughter, Eva, who only made it to 10 years old before being taken out by this new deadly virus. Miranda was understandably devastated by this, so much so that she sought to leave the area and seek isolation away from everyone, and with that would decide she would end her life. As she ventured into a nearby cave to commit this act, Miranda would suddenly have her mind changed as she became distracted by a massive and ancient fungal super colony that she would go on to call the mold. As Miranda approached the giant mold, she would go on to touch the fungal root of it, and as she did, she would go on to see the memories of hundreds, if not thousands of people who had been consumed by this substance over the many centuries. One of the memories she witnessed during this was her own daughter's, who soon after her death and burial had been assimilated into the mold and became part of this massive living fungus. This fueled Miranda as she believed the mold was the answer to all of her problems. Here she thought that she could use the mold to bring back her lost daughter with all of her memories and enable them to go back to where they were before the Spanish flu hit their village. And with this, she would go on to worship this mold super colony and would go on to call the substance the Black God. Emerging out of the cave with part of the mold substance, Miranda would go on to start her plan of bringing her daughter back to this earth. Getting back to the village that was still heavily affected by the Spanish flu, she would go on to infect some of the villagers with the mold, which would actually go on to cure them of their sickness. As Miranda continued to venture over the village curing people, she would also show up at the local church, giving sermons stating that she was a prophet of the Black God. Despite this village once being an extremely proud Christian community, community. Those who had been touched by this mind-altering mold quickly turned their backs on their Christian faith and started following the ways of Miranda and the mold, forming a new pagan cult and placing Miranda at the forefront of it as their main voice. With this new formation, the infected villagers would also go on to call Miranda Mother for bringing them into a new way of thinking. As the village ventured forth into the next few decades, Miranda would continue her research on the mold substance, doing most of her research in an underground makeshift lab beneath the village and ceremony site. Her main breakthrough during this research process was the creature that was named the Cadeau, the Romanian word for gift. This creature was a parasitic nematode that had been altered by the mold and genetically changed into a new looking creature. Miranda saw this as an opportunity to further her ambitions, and with the Cadeau would implant them into various people within the village and lands around. These people ranged from the peasants to nobility with the aim of not only furthering her research, but also hoping to create a superhuman host for her daughter's copy to live inside, most likely so that she was forever protected from anything that could affect her later in her life. Unfortunately, this experimentation with the Cadeau would be a failure, with most of the subjects either dying off or becoming lichens, Canaan-like creatures who became extremely violent to anyone in their way, using primitive weapons to slice and kill anyone who got in their way. With Mother Miranda seeing her test subjects turn into vicious lichens, she would go on to cast them out of the village to make sure the rest of the unaffected villagers could remain alive for the rest of her experiments. In the end, the lichens made their den in the ruins of a medieval fort and were occasionally allowed to raid the village to kill livestock every so often. Eventually, a breakthrough did happen for Miranda as the Cadeau brought about 4 successful candidates. These 4 candidates were in fact the descendants of the 4 kings who ruled over the region, these being Alcina Demetrescu, Karl Heisenberg, Donna Benevento, and Salvatore Moreau. These subjects did become almost superhuman, but sadly for Miranda, they were still not viable hosts for either. Miranda did, however, recognize their ancient feudal rule over the region and got them all together to rule as one council. As another decade went past and the village went into the 1950s, Miranda would go on to find herself a research assistant, a one Oswell E. Spencer, a British medical student who got lost on a hiking exercise. Spencer at first was extremely inspired by Miranda's research, not realizing or even having thought you could mutate a human by implanting an organism into them. However, as time passed on, it became clear that the two would have different end goals and a real conflict of interest and ideology, which would go on to separate the two. Ultimately, Miranda was so focused on just getting her daughter back, whereas Spencer wanted to bring about the next stage in human evolution. With these differences, Spencer would leave Miranda's company, however would still stay in communication with her and continue to hold her in high regard. After leaving her side, Spencer would then go on to found the Umbrella Corporation, as he would go on to discover a deadly ancient virus named the progenitor virus within Africa. Miranda, still fueled on her goal to bring about her daughter, would continue her research, now being helped by the 4 kings of the region and having the whole village as her test subjects. During this time as well, Miranda would alter her appearance and take the form of an elderly woman who would be dubbed as the Old Hag, and with this new disguise would continue to spy on her villagers, with most of them claiming that this old lady was simply just insane. But as the turn of the century took place, Miranda would go on to further her research and would finally find a solution to all of her problems. Finally, an opportunity to bring back her long lost daughter, Eva. As the world went into the new millennium, a crime syndicate known as the Connections, founded by Brandon Bailey, would encounter Miranda and find all of her research, also learning about her intentions to bring back her daughter. With all of this in mind, the Connections offered their help and decided to collaborate with her. As this collaboration went ahead, Miranda would provide the criminal organization with a sample of the mold and an embryonic clone of Eva. At this same time, the Connections were working with Umbrella Corporation's rival company, HCF, on creating a bioorganic weapon, a genetically altered organism created with the intent of either being used as military and paramilitary weapons. This was suddenly enhanced even more when they were given the mold, which they believed would enhance the project. With the embryo they were given by Miranda, the Connections would start creating a number of prototypes, with Miranda overlooking all of the process, and eventually saw the development of their first E-type, created sometime before 2014, Evelyn. With Evelyn's creation, Miranda went to go and meet her with her assigned handlers Mia Winters and Alan Droney. But unfortunately for Miranda, this was not to last long, as the Connections facility housing Evelyn was taken over by the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance as they captured Evelyn and transported her across the ocean on a tanker. This tanker, however, would then crash off the coast of Louisiana, resulting in the Dolby incident, a series of violent homicides which took place around the Baker Ranch in Dolby Parish, Louisiana, between the years of 2014 and 2017. Miranda was once again without her host for her Eva clone and would continue searching for the next few years for a suitable host she could use. This all came about in the year of 2021 when the Miranda discovered vital intel regarding Evelyn. It was made apparent to her that whilst Evelyn was killed within the BSAA operation in July 2017, she had infected Mia Winters and her husband Ethan, who had conceived a child within this same time. Luckily for Miranda, the Connections housed a mole in the BSAA that was able to provide Miranda with the family's location and the child's name, Rose. Miranda instantly knew that Rose was the answer to all of her problems. She was to be the host for her Eva clone. With this in mind, Miranda made plans to abduct her from the Winters home, and on Wednesday the 3rd of February 2021, Miranda instructed a villager, Eugen, to bring her medical equipment and drugs to prepare for the abduction. 2 days after this preparation, Miranda successfully abducted Mia and subjected her to tests in the village. At this same time, she also assimilated Mia's DNA in order to pass off as her and proceeded to infiltrate the Winters home. This worked like a charm, as Ethan could not tell that his wife was not actually his wife at all. In fact, she was really Miranda in disguise. This was all helped by the fact that Ethan and Mia were having marriage difficulties, so any hostility towards him was just seen as normal behavior, and any sudden familiarity with local folklore and cuisine was just easily explained away by her. For a while this worked until Captain Chris Redfield and his troops of the Counter-Bioterrorism Unit invaded the house and gunned down Mia in front of Ethan, after they had been watching and investigating Miranda since the Baker incident back in 2017. Whilst Ethan believed Mia to be dead, Miranda could not actually be harmed by conventional firearms and was actually still alive. With this in mind, Miranda knew it would be almost impossible to escape with Rose undetected, and instead chose to play dead. Her body was then loaded into a car with Ethan and Rose and taken away. But during their travels, Miranda would attack and kill the 2 soldiers on board, causing the car to crash in a forest, in which she would once again survive, grabbing Rose in the process and running off into the village. With Miranda now successfully with the abduction of her host Eva, she would hold a ritual with the 4 lords at the cave church. During this, Rose was subjected to a procedure with the items provided by Eugen, which crystallized her body in a way that allowed her to survive even when mutilated. Rose was then divided amongst the 4 lords, as this served as an insurance for the ritual. However, with Rose now under her possession, Miranda planned to have everyone killed to ensure the ceremony's completion. With this in mind, and the peasants now being utterly useless to her cause, she would unleash the Lycans on them to wipe them out completely. By the morning, most of the population had either been transformed into Lycans themselves or had been slaughtered by the hordes. During this attack, Miranda witnessed Ethan fighting off overwhelming numbers of Lycans, and instead of letting him die to their hands, would order the Lycans to retreat, and taking the form of the old hag, once again would provide Ethan with false information that Rose was at Castle Dimitrescu. And during her final venture throughout the village, Miranda would find and kill the last village survivor, Lulian, killing him personally. As Ethan ventured through the village, escaping the games of Heisenberg as well as killing Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters in the process, Miranda would once again show herself as the old hag, teasing Ethan about her knowledge of his mutant nature, and once again sent him in search for the other 3 lords. During Ethan's journey, Miranda would become aware of the BSAA operation that was taking place, with Chris Redfield's squad heading to the village. As they ventured into the village, they would set up camps within different areas, one being located within the very cave she discovered the fungal root in. This also became apparent to both Moreau and Heisenberg as well. Eventually, Ethan was able to shut down 3 of the lords and recover all 4 flasks and place them within the giant's chalice at the ceremony site. Miranda saw this from afar, and it was time to wake up the Black God, which would cause earthquakes all throughout the village's surface. But as this went on, Ethan finally encountered the final lord, Heisenberg, and as night fell, would go on to fight him, with Ethan being victorious over him. With Heisenberg now no longer a threat to Miranda's ultimate goal, Ethan had outlived his purpose, and when coming face to face with him, Miranda would go on to rip out his heart, hoping it would kill him quickly. As the night went on, Miranda waited at the ceremony site as the fungal root grew more and more, destroying the eastern and southern parts of the village in the process. Finally, the European BSAA made their move on Miranda, as they had been independently investigating it from Redfield. Miranda was not threatened by this, however, as they were not a sizable threat. This was also helped by the fact that the root had grown so much that it was able to create imitation creatures like lichens to fend off the operators on the ground. But Miranda had ruled out one thing during this: Ethan Winters himself, who had possessed a hyper-regenerative ability which allowed him to survive her murder attempt, however was still in the process of dying. Ignoring this threat, Miranda continued the ritual. However, it became clear that this ritual would not be a success, as the reincorporated Rose was fighting back the super colony, and as this happened, the fungal root was weakened in the process, meaning Miranda's Eva consciousness failed to take over. With Ethan and Redfield now on the attack, Miranda was forced into transforming to take them all out and survive their operation. But for Miranda, it was the end of the line. As she desperately tried to kill Ethan once again, Ethan was able to shoot her several times, exhausting her body, calcifying it, and finally killing her once and for all. As Redfield left the village escorting Rose back to her mother, Ethan stayed behind facing the Megamycete and blowing it up using Redfield's detonator. This explosion decimated the whole village, killing all of the remaining lichens and ensuring Miranda was truly dead and could not come back. In the end, a tragic event that took the life of her 10-year-old daughter drove Mother Miranda into desperate measures to help her maybe see her daughter once again. But with the power of this destructive mold, she would lose her sense of right and wrong and cause more destruction on the whole of the village, affecting the innocent lives of everyone that lived there. A simple village trying to recover from the effects of the Spanish flu would just be plunged into chaos, with creatures roaming the lands that shouldn't even exist. Mother Miranda's cult would be the death of this part of the country and almost caused the destruction of other parts of the world. With Miranda now dead thanks to the hands of the supposedly dead Ethan Winters, her rule and goals using the Black God were over, and hopefully this would be the start of the clear-up of the mold that had plagued the land for generations. But for now, this has been the story of Mother Miranda and how she ruled her cult over the small farming village out somewhere within Eastern Europe. But that is the story of Miranda before and during the events of Resident Evil Village. Quite honestly, I really enjoyed this game despite Ethan Winters annoying me for the most part, but I really enjoyed learning about the backstory of how Miranda affected all of the village and the events of Resident Evil Biohazard. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this story and video, and if you did, let me know if you'd like to see more Resident Evil lore, because there is quite a lot of it, and with Resident Evil 4's remake coming out soon, I felt it was a great series to finally dive into. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, why not give it a like, check out my other lore videos in the playlists below, leave a nice comment and subscribe if you haven't already, as we are so close to 60,000 subscribers and that would be great to get before the end of June. And if you really loved it, then why not support the channel on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member like these amazing people that I'm about to list right now. Big thanks to our small fish guys, our big fishes, Christopher, AVP Man, Last Persona User and Artocrem, our sharks, Wow Such Gaming, and our new guy Jason X117, our huge megalodons Sinus, Jacob Garcia and Chernobyl Stalker, and our absolutely legendary starfish Shadow SGT. Also big shout out to our YouTube channel members, our wise ones Jambu and Fiery Italian. All your support means the world to me and means I can make these videos for you guys, so thank you all so much. But that is all for now. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this dive into the Resident Evil lore, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.